Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Elia Nahra, and I am here today with some guests from the Men's Story Project. So let me start by introducing Dr. Josie Lehrer. She's the founder and director of the Men's Story Project and a senior consultant with the Stanford University Global Center for Gender Equality. We also are joined by Judson George, an artist who lives in Atlanta, Georgia. He's an advocate for mental health awareness, and his story is about how breaking the cycle of shame has empowered him to begin healing from being a victim of abuse. We're also joined by Michael Wen, who holds a master's in social work, and he's a poet, author, and mental health professional residing in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. His story tells how he uses creative writing to begin his healing as he continues to rewrite his life. Before we start, I want to make sure that our audience knows that Judson and Michael will be sharing powerful personal stories about their own journeys of healing from sexual violence. These stories can contain some triggering details, and it is important to remember to take care of yourself during or after this community conversation. And if you need to step away, please do so. We will have some very important resources for survivors and allies in the comments. And towards the end of this conversation, we will have a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please share in the comments. So I would like to start by asking, what is the Men's Story Project?
Thank you, Elia. Thanks for having us. So the Men's Story Project is a movement building project for healthy masculinities, violence prevention, and gender equality, which I started back in 2008 in San Francisco, and it's been spreading in the US and abroad. And we basically work with groups to create and film live events where very diverse men and folks who identify with masculinity of all different kinds of walks of life publicly share personal stories that take a critical look at how they themselves were taught, raised, pressured, socialized to be as men, challenge rigid or harmful ideas about masculinity that need to be challenged, and then also celebrate sources of beauty and joy in their life, talk about journeys of healing or of personal change, and overall take a stand for healthy masculinities and gender justice.
And so probably you already answered a little bit of this next question, but what sparked the idea for the Men's Story Project?
Yeah, so there is a pretty significant public health and social justice issue, right, with gender norms around the world, right? So to take the big picture view, across communities and across societies, there are ideas, the dominant kinds of ideas of how boys and girls and men and women supposedly ought to act and look and feel and relate to each other, the kinds of roles they should play, how they should be, or what's acceptable. And oftentimes, when we look at different kinds of public health challenges, there are many that we can actually link back to social ideas about the genders. And specifically, if we look at masculinity, there are a range of public health and social justice challenges that are linked with dominant, harmful, or rigid ideas about masculinity. For example, just to give kind of a systematized view here, when we think about men's violence against people of diverse genders, against women, against men, against people of diverse genders, when we think about HIV/AIDS, homophobia, transphobia. Oops, Mike, is it okay if you put your phone on or your computer on mute until? Anyway, but and then we can look at unintended pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, including HIV. And then in terms of men's own relationships and mental health, research has found that men who adhere to more rigid or stereotypical ideas about how they should be as men, they're more likely to report symptoms of depression, more likely to engage in substance abuse, less likely to have intimate, like genuine, meaningful friendships with other men. You know, this suicidality is higher, and overall, men commit suicide at rates higher than women in the U.S. 70% of suicides back in 2017 were men. So there's a wide range of health and justice issues that are linked with how men and boys are socialized to be men. And then the other piece, because today we're doing a deep dive on the top in this conversation on the topic of men's survivorship from sexual violence. I just briefly want to point out some of the elements that are at play there, which is that oftentimes men and boys who experience sexual violence don't feel like they can reach out for support. And one of those factors can be the sense that they're not supposed to, because either men and boys can't be sexually assaulted, or they're supposed to be stoic and tough and not reach out for help, amongst factors. So we can talk more about all of these topics, but the reason I started the Men's Story Project was to create platforms for men to share their own stories that challenge any and all harmful norms about masculinity, and challenge also intersecting oppressive ideologies like sexism or racism or homophobia, transphobia, ableism, classism, that also produce harm in the world, and take a stand for the beautiful things, and celebrate joy and love in their life, And so it's about creating this kind of platform for honest story sharing, honest community dialogue for social change.
Okay. And so since you mentioned some myths of like sexual violence towards men, do you have like something else that you would like to share in regards of myths? You or Judson or Michael would like to share anything about myths?
Judson or Michael, do you want to chime in on any?
Yeah, sure. I think something that was really a big in my recovery journey was the fact that I felt I would be weak or viewed as being weak if I asked for help or if I talked about what I was going through, that I was having trouble. And so just learning that one of the strongest things I could ever do is ask for help from other people that know better than me, from professionals that can help me with what I was going through. That was like the hardest thing, but also took the most strength. And I didn't realize it till I had already done it. But that, asking for help is not weak. It's literally one of the hardest and strongest things a human being can do when they're in trouble and they don't know what to do. So I think that's a big myth for men, that we're supposed to be strong and we're supposed to, pick ourselves up by our shoelaces and keep moving, and that we're not allowed to need other people in our lives if we're having a hard time. We're not supposed to reach out and say, hey, I'm hurting. Hey, something's wrong. Could you please help? And those words, they don't seem to even come to me instinctively based on being a guy. Hey, would you help me? It's no, we don't need directions. I'll figure it out on my own, kind of thing, from society. So
yeah, I would say the same thing. Especially being an African American man, it's difficult, but also challenging in a way that once people see that we are strong and vulnerable and transparent, that we definitely have something to offer, and one of those things is to be an example of how our masculinity does not define us. It really is just a part of the complement of us being a human on this earth. So that's all I want to say.
Yeah, having that, it's difficult a lot of times to understand that vulnerability and being brave go hand in hand. They usually sound like they shouldn't, right? But they are one of the same. Without vulnerability, there is no bravery. So thank you for sharing that with me, with us. So Michael, Judson, would you tell me a little bit more about your experience with the Men's Story Project? Like, um, how did you hear about them? How was the process of writing or sharing your story, Michael? I know that you use writing, creative writing, as a way of healing, and well, writing is also part of the arts in Judson. I know that you're an artist. So how what can you tell me about that process of sharing your story and sitting down and writing and knowing what important things to say, or how much to say?
Yeah, I can go ahead real quick. For me, I had never openly talked about my entire story before this project. I had hinted at it to my therapist and talked uh, very, small about what the experience. Because in the past, when I had tried to talk about what had happened with a few other people, it didn't go very well for me. And so, because of that, I had a lot of things come up for me as I wrote my story down for the first time. The project pairs each one of us with a one-on-one coach that's part of the team. And so when we work with our one-on-one coach, they helped us to kind of reel in all the things that we were talking about and create more of a cohesive story that wanted to tell what we wanted to talk about. Kind of helped us to eliminate some of the things that could be more harmful for others to hear and really focus on like the recovery and the journey that it took us to get where we are. I had as an artist, I had a lot of dark pictures that I edited come out during this process, a lot of art that I'll probably never post or share because it's scary and it was emotional and it's very uh, demonic in ways, but it was really healing for me to create that art through this project while I was writing my story and working on figuring out what I wanted, my experience to mean to me and in my process of sharing it with others.
Thank you.
Mike, you're on mute. Michael, do you want to share? You're still on mute right now, I think.
How about now? Am I on mute?
Nope, we
Good?
can hear you. You're good.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to say real quick that I came to be involved with the Men's Story Project the last year. I work as a social worker in Dallas, and I was volunteering with New Friends, New Lives. And someone there, Ms. Sundil, mentioned my name to Emiliano with TASA. And they were doing this men's story project. So I got involved that way. That's how I found out about it. And I had, just like Judson, I had never shared my story as well. So that's how I got involved in it. It's been I've been sharing, stories and poetry and creative writing and doing workshops and acting and doing all that, but I never, as we say, went in. And then what came out was this freeing experience where I could, finally share my story. So that's how I got involved in it. It's, someone told someone who told me, and I sent an email, and here I am.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of quick comments for some added context. So basically, Judson, Michael, and I just worked together on a project that was a collaboration between the Men's Story Project and a national organization called Men Healing, which supports male survivors of sexual violence. And then Michael and I also worked on another iteration of the Men's Story Project that was in collaboration with the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, also known as TASA. And for so the project with TASA had 12 storytellers, and the stories that they all shared address diverse issues that interconnect with masculinities, kind of along that list of topics that I was talking about earlier. And then when the Men's Story Project collaborated with Men Healing, that was a group of storytellers whose stories all focused on their experiences of healing from sexual violence victimization. And so that was a specific adaptation, if you will, of the Men's Story Project to create this new project with Men Healing with a specific focus on that topic. And to create both of these productions, so they took the form ultimately of live online events where the two wonderful presenters who you're meeting right now, they shared their stories publicly along with their fellow group members. So those were live events with a live online audience where those stories were shared and followed by dialogue. And to prepare for these events, and I'm just going to share quickly just to give audience members a sense of what can go into creating these kinds of silence-breaking, truth-sharing events publicly, which are pretty darn unusual. We had a series of workshops. And so with TASA, it was 6 workshops. With Men Healing, it was 8, but weekly workshops where the presenters were connecting with each other, giving each other feedback on their works in progress, learning together, supporting each other, building community. And it was really beautiful. And I'll speak from my own experience, witnessing, bearing witness, to what was happening and transpiring, but this really incredibly bold, candid, brave, courageous work done by each presenter, So anyway, I can talk more about this, but the whole idea is for this work to spread and grow. And, what I'm learning with each iteration of this project is that, it's just how to continue doing it stronger and better each time. So just wanted to share that for context.
Thank you, Josie. So I am hearing your experience of the project, but I would like to know, and I can, if each one of you want to share with me, what has been the impact of the project in your communities, or even in yourself and your life? What can you tell me about that impact of being part of the project, of the Men's Story Project?
I think for me personally, when I viewed my experience around the abuse that happened in my life, it was this very small kind of frame that I was trying to deal with all these different words of emotion bouncing around, and it was really tight, and I didn't have room to understand a lot of it. And this project has, in a way, like opened that frame up and given me this space to be able to move things around and to process them differently and to understand my experience in a way that I can now start to heal from it. Where before, every time it even came into my head, I sort of shut down and engaged in really negative behaviors to try to shush that voice in my head that was, trying to tell me about what had happened and bring it up. And so this project's not only given me the courage, but also the space to sort of develop tactics to understand how to get better and how to move forward now in ways that I feel like I was stuck. So.
Thank you. Michael, Josie, would you like to share from your perspective?
Michael's good. I think maybe what we could do is, I can talk about impacts that we, in terms of messages that we get from audience members, from presenters, reflections afterward. And I know that that's part of what keeps me doing this work is, receiving feedback, for example, from the Texas event that Michael was part of. Somebody wrote, "These stories are life-changing, life-saving. What could be improved about the project? Just keep doing more of it." So I'd be happy to talk more about impacts, but I feel like it might be helpful if we move to actually hearing the presenters share their stories, and then I think we can get more into, the topic of why is this helpful, right? Like what are some of the ways in which sharing these stories publicly can help people?
Yes. So I am open for that, Josie.
Okay. Well, in that case, cool. Why don't we move toward that? So, why don't we maybe spotlight our first presenter and begin with the story sharing segment of the conversation. And our first presenter is Michael. So can we spotlight Michael on the screen, please?
Michael, if you want, Josie, Michael is being spotlighted right now. So if you,
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it. My name is Michael Gwynn. I here in Dallas, Texas, and this is my story. This story chronicles my path to healing and reveals how I overcame an unrelenting feeling of hopelessness that stemmed from a past filled with neglect and abuse. Last year, Mother's Day weekend, I drove from Irving to Jacksonville, Texas to visit my little brother. He was in hospice. And after years of running from himself, his body had simply given up. And I too know the scent of burnt candles too well. As I watched him lying there, I became overwhelmed by the deepest, most profound feeling of sadness my heart had ever felt. And even though he said nothing, I felt that he knew I was there, that he had just been waiting for me to come say goodbye. As I held his hand, I thought about how for 50 years I'd felt the guilt and shame, not only from my own victimization, but from watching my little brother spiral out of control as he struggled with his own. For him, it was a lifetime of destructive behaviors. And I've struggled with not having done enough to be there for him, to let him know that it was not our fault, that there was nothing we did wrong, that our worth as human beings is priceless, and that our assault does not lessen our abilities or worth as men, that it does not define or break us, that we don't have to feel ashamed because there is honor in being a survivor, that our childhood was borrowed, not stolen, that together we could rescue our inner child and become whole again. It took a long time for me to get to this point. It took years to get myself to a place where I could finally begin to heal, but also to overcome this crippling sense of helplessness I felt from watching my brother struggle so much. And here I am, college grad, published poet, actor, author, social worker, and him, a twice convicted felon, homeless, addicted, alone in a nursing home at 53. There are things that no one will ever know about our past. I kissed his forehead as he stared straight ahead. Tears formed in the corner of his eyes, confirmation perhaps that he heard me. And even though I will never forget the murder of innocence and that there will always be a crack wider than the crease between sheets behind those closed doors, it was at that moment that I began to realize that I no longer had to feel ashamed. For years, I've expressed so much anger and guilt from not being able to have done something to stop what happened to us. As an African-American man, the denial of male victimhood was an invisible barrier to my healing. I realized that right now, as a result, I've lived in isolation every day. This isolation affected me in just in all aspects of my life and caused me to feel so hopeless and helpless because I wasn't able to protect him or me. I used to be so overcome with emotion thinking about those days that I just wanted to disappear. But over time, I sought counseling, which helped me cope with my past trauma. In addition to counseling, I found that expressive writing proved to be a powerful, freeing, and easily accessible remedy for me. And now I create miracles on pages with the ink of a pen rewriting me from within, because this is one of the many ways survivors survive. This much needed rediscovery is teaching me to accept the support that I've needed to recover from my trauma and to break the cycle of silence that often leads to a toxic existence instead of a positive presence. Healing is absolutely possible and achievable for me. I know that now. And I give myself permission to connect to loving, affirmative, strong, sensitive, accepting men and women in my life and community. As I heal, I'm developing the ability to experience a wider range of emotions to enhance my mental health and healthy connections to others. As I heal, I commit to reconnecting to the boy inside me today so that we can play, laugh, and experience joy together tomorrow. As I heal, I release and forgive myself for any responsibility I had taken on in the past from my abuse. You see, I've used all the resources I know to get myself back to a place of self-love and peace. I've used things like creative writing to pour my pain and grief into my poems and commit myself to the practice of transparency because it allows me to breathe. This commitment has led to a clarity that has manifested itself into a meaningful emotional directive for me. Feels so good to begin to know who I am, to understand the importance of how navigating perceived norms of masculinity, especially as an African-American man, can shape the way that I process and articulate my lived experiences of sexual assault. I'm a man who is no longer afraid to embrace his past and whose soul is now overflowing with what I know will eventually be a profound inner peace. I am a survivor, and I'm learning to see beyond my own past trauma and realize that I'm going to be all right. You see, my story is just beginning. And I'm hopeful that one of these days, breadcrumbs of wisdom, hope, and self-reflection will eventually lead me to the best me I can be. My life is moving right along now, and I like where it's going, to a place where I no longer have to wonder how to hold on to healing, because I accept and acknowledge unconditionally my own individuality and unique personality. There are layers to me I'm still uncovering. And as I peel back the pain from my past, as I unravel, sort through, and rearrange my life, I am rediscovering so much raw happiness and genuine joy. It feels so good. And I'm proud of me, y'all. And I know my little brother is up there smiling and that he is proud of me too. My healing came via positive self-acceptance, and it is enabling me to channel my trauma into transformation. But most importantly, it gives me access to connect with other survivors who have been where I am. It is in these validating communities that I've found the most healing. And I pray, practice, and participate in places that provide positive platforms that nurture my peace and purpose. But mainly, I've been able to connect to professional groups like the Men's Story Project, who provided me with a tremendously supportive platform to speak my truth. I'm so honored to be part of this outpouring of that features stories from some of the bravest men I know, like Judson. I know that our shared experiences have sharpened and strengthened one another. These connections continue to help me recognize, love, and respect myself and others in a way I've never imagined. I'm a survivor who is a provider for other survivors. And I no longer have to try to convince myself that it was only a little thing, that it had no impact on my life, that I had to block out the memories because I've always known it happened. Standing there beside my little brother helped motivate me to no longer be silenced by stigma and shame, that I am a man healing, willing to confront the past so that I can walk forward into my future. It was Saturday, May 9th, 9:15 a.m., Mother's Day weekend last year, when I said goodbye to my little brother and hello to me. Thank you. Now, let's take a collective breath. Thank you for listening. And now, please welcome a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful human, Judson.
Thank you so much, Michael. My name's Judson, and the title of my story is Breaking the Cycle of Shame. I was an awkward kid. I didn't realize it at the time, but in hindsight, I had an exceedingly difficult time making friends at school. I always found myself getting along with the other kids' parents much better than I did with their children on the playground. Around adults, I was able to be charming and charismatic. However, around my classmates, I felt lost and confused as to how to fit in. All my insecurities around having friendships made me extremely vulnerable to being abused. At the age of 12, I became heavily involved in my spiritual community, and I began to pray for these two guys that were a year older than me to become my best friends. Every night for 3 years, I'd look up at the ceiling in my room and ask God to please answer my prayers. I prayed and I prayed until one day my prayers were miraculously answered, and the three of us all started to become best friends. A few weeks after becoming best friends with these two guys, they started to force themselves on me and molest me. These assaults took place 4 to 5 times a week during the next 2 years. As time went on, they began to molest me in multiple locations, on all of our group trips, and at all 3 of our homes. The week before my 17th birthday, I was drugged by my friends, and I woke up being gang raped by 4 men in a secluded park. After almost 4 hours of being gang raped, I was told to forget about what had happened, and that my little brother would be next if I ever told anyone. Even though all I wanted to do was forget about being assaulted, I could not stop thinking about it. Having been assaulted was the only kind of friendship that I had ever had, and I was completely confused about what the word friendship even meant. I kept asking myself the same questions repeatedly. I could not make sense of so many things, like, was that normal? Was that going to happen again? And is this how other people have friendships? I eventually justified their assault as my payment for their friendship. I think that believing this lie was easier for me to accept over the truth that my so-called best friends had intentionally hurt me. When the molestation began, I began to act out more in my eating disorder and drug addiction. I started to heavily use these two destructive behaviors as a coping mechanism to cover up all the pain I was feeling. I can remember thinking that I didn't have a choice as to whether or not I was going to act out in my addictions. By the time the violence against me had stopped, my eating disorder and drug addiction were completely in control of all my actions. However, I didn't even understand that they had been taking over my entire life. To be open about it, I really didn't care if my addictions were ruining my life, because in my mind, that meant that I didn't have to feel so much anymore. 9 treatment centers, 1 DUI, 1 DWI, 3 college expulsions, 4 expunged felonies, 4 lost jobs, 3 months incarcerated, multiple intentional overdoses, 14 years of active bulimia, 15 years of active drug addiction, and 20 years of a deep-seated fear to express any forms of my own sexuality. I'm just now starting to heal. After everything that I had been through, it was not until I found myself in a lockdown mental health facility that I concluded maybe trying to keep the violence against me a secret is not worth killing myself over. It was only then that I realized I needed help from outside of my own head if I wished to stay alive and get better. At that point, I did not know what getting better after my life could possibly even look like. But I knew that anything had to be better than my old ways of painful deterioration and self-harm. I had always felt completely alone in the world, especially after being raped, and I was petrified to tell anyone the truth about my past experiences. I only started to speak the truth about the violence against me 3 years ago. Before that, I had tried to talk about it with others, and it had never been a positive experience. The first loved ones that I confided in 15 years ago did not believe me when I summoned the courage to tell them that I had been abused. They told me that I was simply confused and that because I had been on drugs, I was responsible for anything that had happened to me. The second person that I tried to tell 13 years ago was a therapist. They told me that they thought I had wanted to be assaulted and that I was probably gay and in the closet. After being denied any validation for my experiences, I kept the violence against me a secret for almost 10 more years of my life. When others didn't believe me when I told them that I was a survivor, it had a very adverse effect on me. I started to believe I could never tell anyone about it, and this caused me to spiral downward in my mental health issues of anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Back then, I was unable to put all the pieces of my life together so that I could comprehend the magnitude of what the violence against me had really done to my mental stability. When I finally started to openly process what had taken place, nothing made sense to me, and the events from my life hurt too much to think about rationally. After realizing that I could not get better from my eating disorder, drug addiction, and sexual assault alone, I slowly started to reap the benefits of accepting help from others. I needed a rigorous system of accountability for me to start my journey of healing, and I found that within my most recent treatment center in Arizona. As soon as I arrived there, I was given 2 accountability buddies to always stay with, and a fully planned out day of 12-step meetings, small groups, private therapy, volunteering, and learning new life skills. That treatment center was a really difficult experience for me. The staff there were all about tough love and telling us to just man up, which is not exactly helpful for me. But they did help me to get better from my addictions. And that healing process taught me some of the most valuable lessons of my life. One of those lessons that I learned there during the 2 years at that treatment center was that I am the only one who can decide to take steps on a healing path. I realized that no matter how many other people thought I needed to get better, I would never get better until I decided I wanted to. I had to accept that my road to recovery is one that I must walk daily if I wish to stay healthy, and that no one else can walk this road for me. I now know that I do not walk this path alone, even though I'm responsible for each of my own steps forward. I've learned to have faith that every setback can teach me a useful lesson for my future successes, even when I don't see those lessons right away. My past no longer has total control over my life, and I'm learning that the way I view my experiences can change over time. My journey of healing has had many steps along the way, and each one of those steps has helped me to understand what getting better can look like for me. My recovery journey has helped me to exist in a free way that I was never able to before. Instead of the constant stress and anguish over my life, I spend time creating art and singing. Instead of obsessing constantly over what happened, I can be present for what is happening now. I can laugh again, and I'm able to remember it all because I'm sober. I wear my 12-step badges with pride today. Of course, I still have my bad days, but I have found that those days usually come about when I have not been diligent with my self-care. Slowly, and in many ways that are sometimes beyond my own understanding, I'm becoming a person that I feel proud to call myself. It took the care and support from my family, my therapist, an amazing recovery community, and years of hard work to heal before I could start to recognize myself in the mirror again. These days, I sometimes feel I'm still getting to know the man that's looking back at me in the mirror, but I feel beyond blessed that he's here doing his best. One of the greatest gifts that recovery has blessed my life with is that I've started to realize that there are still steps forward I want to take in my life. Before my recovery started, all I could ever focus on was the dulling of constant pain from my past. Through recovery, I have a new understanding of the harm which happened to me as a young man, and I can work through that trauma with a newly learned skill set. I recently came to understand that I've been living my life as an asexual due to all the fear that I still have around physical intimacy. I have been in a monogamous relationship with my partner for the last 6 years, and she is the first long-term partner I've ever had. We are not physically intimate though, and it has been so amazing to feel like I want to heal, not only for myself, but also so that I can be with her, both sexually and emotionally. She has patiently worked with me on every level to reach this moment of healing in my life, and I really hope to share the first consensual sexual experience of my life with her super soon. I know that having been abused for over 2 years and then gang raped has been a driving force in many of my destructive behaviors. I was not able to see this fact in live action moments of my life, but it seems so clear to me now looking back on it. My past was consumed by the fear, shame, and guilt that I felt around what happened. But thankfully, that is not my life anymore. My story of survival comes only after an exceedingly difficult journey, spanning many years of intense pain and sorrow. I feel grateful to share my triumphs over this period of struggles in my life, and I would not be where I am today without the loving encouragement of others. However, it is very important for me to always remember that I am only able to share my story of recovery today because of the life-saving work that I have done for myself and the difficult steps that I have taken to heal. I am incredibly proud to finally be free enough to share my ongoing journey of recovery with you all today. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate all of you being here today. And if we could all now just take a moment to have a deep breath together, and then we'll move on.
Thank you very much, Judson and Michael, for sharing those stories with us. I will like to continue by opening this time for questions from our audience. And I know that we have one right now. How can we as a community or individuals better help men who have experienced sexual violence?
I think one of the most important things is to believe people and to listen to them when they tell you their truth. And I think if you don't understand what's happening, something that can be really helpful is expressing that I don't understand this, but I'm willing to learn what's going on with you, and I'm willing to learn how to support you. Nobody has to know how to help in this situation right off the bat, but just knowing that someone's willing to learn how to help me, even when I may not know what that is, that's been super beneficial and helpful for me in my recovery journey.
I would say just patience. just patience is all I would say. That's the number one thing. And with that, understanding, love, support will happen, but just have patience with us. That's all.
Thank you. Another Facebook question, and seems like this one is for Josie. How many men are impacted by sexual violence?
Studies have different numbers, but the numbers that are currently on the CDC website are 1 in 4 for men and over 1 in 3 for women. So around 1 in 4 men are estimated to have some form of physical sexual violence in their lifetime.
And I know that today we are talking more on sexual violence because it's April and Sexual Assault Awareness Month. But what other subjects do you touch on the Men's Story Project?
Well, so actually, I want to add one other thing to what the number that I just mentioned. Around 1 in 4 men are estimated to experience sexual violence in their lifetime as children or adults, but it's also very widely underreported, right? And so that's the part that, in addition to preventing it entirely, we also really need to work on creating environments and where more men feel like they can report. And be supported. So let's see. So in terms of the Men's Story Project more broadly, the topics addressed are some of the ones that I mentioned before, but the 3 core themes that I've seen across presenters' projects over time are celebrating, challenging, and resisting, right? So giving thanks for sources of beauty and joy in their life, like beautiful relationships, fatherhood, mentors that they've had, beautiful partnerships with, their spouses or partners, challenging specific ideas about masculinity that have fostered harm in their life, either because they believed in them themselves and were, perpetuating that, different forms of harm, or if they were on the receiving end, in terms of being bullied or told, to man up or not feel or not, express part of their natural human self, right? And then resisting, intersecting oppressions like sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, in terms of what it's been like for them to be on the receiving end of those ideologies, or their journeys of unlearning. So for example, there was a man, I'll share a powerful example. There was a man who was 69, I believe, a poet named Mac Dennis. You can see his story on our YouTube channel, from Oakland, California. Michael seems to know him. So he identifies in the present tense as a member of the Black Panther Party, and he shared a story about a poem about how he unlearned homophobia as an adult, because his young gay cousin who died of AIDS-related complications didn't want him at his bedside as he was dying. And he begins his piece with the Black Panther salute of all power to the people. And he closes his piece saying, "I am proud," and forgive me for the quoting, but I want to share the quote. He says very powerfully at the end of his piece, "I am proud to have been a member of the Black Panther Party who fought for Black people's rights. And today I am proud to say that I am willing to fight for all people's rights, all power to all the people." And it's an immensely powerful piece that he shared 10 years ago and resonates in my brain today. And there are so many stories that presenters have shared over time, that are just challenging and shaking the structures, shaking the ideologies that form the structures of oppression in our society. And I just find it incredibly compelling that, unlike an asteroid that's about to slam into the earth that we can do nothing about, I think there is a huge proportion of human suffering that has to do with hearts and minds and our ideas of how we can or should treat each other. And that relates to sexual violence against men, against women, and people of all genders. And it relates to every form of violence and oppression that exists in our society. And so, so the stories of the Men's Story Project have to do with verbalizing and vocalizing those journeys of challenging, of personal change, and I think the best teachers that we have are our own peers, our own role models, our own community members, and that's why I think human beings getting up on a platform and sharing their own true stories is one of the most powerful things we can possibly do in the world. And I think Judson and Michael, and so many other presenters in this project and similar projects, are just our freaking heroes. So thank you so much for doing what you're doing. And yeah, I'll leave it at that for that question.
Thank you, Josie. We have a question for Michael. I just want to remind you that if you're not comfortable answering the question, you are welcome to tell me. Can you speak more about your experience as a Black man who has experienced violence?
In my experience as a Black man who's experienced violence, now we're talking about violence as in violence or violence as in sexual assault. I mean, I guess it would be the same. Specifically, which violence are we talking? We talking about it as it pertains to this topic, right?
Yes, I will suppose.
Okay. It's I don't think it's any different than anybody else. Sexual assault is sexual assault. But how we navigate that as a Black man, as Black men, is a little different because of, our culture and stigma and, and obviously, this whole thing with mental health and transparency and what will people say? So it's the violence is the same for any human, but it's just those cultural norms and that those perceived, norms about masculinity for African American men that makes it a little bit more trickier to navigate, in my opinion. And so that's what I would say. It's just that, it's just trickier because of our culture. And, like Judson said, we have to be tough. We're men. And I think that may be, a little bit more for African American men, in my opinion, because, that's the way it was for me. So I can only speak for me and what I've been through, but that's, it's tough. It's tough to have that lived experience, to go through that, to know that it was violent, to know that it was, it was taking from us what never should have been taken. And here we are now, having to navigate and deal with and heal from. So, no different than anybody else. It's just tough to navigate sometimes because of where you come from.
Thank you. So remember that if you have any more questions, you can put them on the chat box. I see some comments. I do have a question while we wait for another one. Josie, I know that when at the beginning, you were talking about how the Men's Story Project is present in many states. And like we know that Judson is in Georgia and Michael is here in Texas. But I also know that this is a project that is welcome in other places. Would you tell me a little bit more of where else besides the United States the Men's Story Project is present?
Absolutely. So thus far, there have been, I think, 36 live events of the Men's Story Project and I actually just had to figure this out for an application. So it was 23 US states. I think there have been events or workshops. And then also in Chile, where my family is from, we had a production. Also in Gaza and the West Bank in partnership with UN Women. And in Canada at McGill University. And so there are, I think, 14 universities that have put on their own locally led Men's Story Project productions. And then we partnered, as I mentioned, with the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, with Men Healing. And so I've, just for listeners who might work with organizations, I'll just say briefly that there is a resource package, an action kit, if you will, to create these kinds of productions locally, because the whole goal of the project really is for these kinds of events and productions and workshop series for the presenters to take place, in a local way. So there's a training guide, there's a license, there's training and coaching available so that local professionals can facilitate groups of presenters through an 8-week workshop process, and then do these events either live in person when the pandemic ends and or online. And one of the really fantastic learnings that came out of this pandemic period is that we can do this online really effectively, and it actually helps the project be much more accessible for people who might not otherwise be able to participate as presenters or as audience members in it, and it also lowers the cost, so that was nice learning from COVID in this COVID period.
Thank you,
And
Judson.
one other thing I'll just say quickly is that the kind of feedback that we get over time that we've been getting has been consistent, no matter where it's taking place. Of people saying this is revolutionary, this is transformative, this is healing and inspiring, keep doing this, and in West Bank and the Gaza Strip, one of the common themes of that feedback was, this is great, and what took you so long? And those were productions on masculinities and gender equality and violence prevention. So I'm just eager to help support this work and continuing to grow. And each group that does it is as a co-builder of the work, because we learn new lessons and the work gets stronger with each iteration.
Thank you. And I have another question. What gaps have you encountered in survival resources for men? So Judson, Michael, Josie, who would like to answer that question? What gaps have you encountered in survival resources available for men?
I think for me, one roadblock I ran into, which things have changed now, thankfully. But when I first started looking for help for my eating disorder and having a drug addiction, there was nowhere that would accept me as a male to go get treatment. And then when I tried to then talk, on top of those two issues that I was expressing to therapists about the sexual assault, it just sort of fell apart. There was no way that there was sort of like at the time, a methodology to doing all three at once, or even trying to process each one with the same therapist. So it was really difficult, in being, finding help and in getting validated for the problems I was having, because I was a man. So I think besides that, it was really once I talked about it and started speaking about it, I didn't really know what to do with that. Thankfully with this workshop, we had weekly sessions, and so we were all getting together and we were all able to process things. But before the workshop started, I had started talking a lot more openly with my therapist, and I sort of didn't know what to do when I went home after talking about what all I was talking about. I didn't know how to go home and process. So I think there is a lot of resources out there, but I think you have to go looking for them for sure. They definitely are not going to fall in your lap a lot of times. And that is sometimes difficult, I think, as a survivor, because the keyboard can feel so heavy to push down on when you're typing in like therapist for sexual assault survivor. It's almost like they won't push themselves, in as you push harder and harder, because you don't want to have to look that up. At least I didn't, I didn't have to try to figure this out because I just had a hard time accepting that it was really real until I started speaking openly about it.
I think for me, about 20 years ago, about 18 years ago, while working as a CPS investigator for the state of Texas, I had never, ever, I think I had pushed it, talk about pushing, I had pushed it down, it never happened, and there it was. But I came in one day from a long day working in the field, and it was a tough day. And I just put my head down on my desk and I started crying. And when I stopped crying, I lifted my head and I had a pen in my hand. And the very first thing I wrote was, what good is my master's degree if I can't be the master of me? And then after that, the writing started pouring, and it's been pouring ever since. When you talk about resources, since I'm in social services and I'm always around the resources, I never capitalize on that. But as I wrote and shared, I was in all these different communities and hearing all this. I guess I got some of the residual, coaching and counseling from hearing and being a speaker and being a poet. But and that was good. Maybe that sustained me for a lot of years. But I never actively, and I knew where they were because I'm in the field. But it wasn't until the Men's Story. It wasn't until the Men's Story Project that I actually look forward to community, to being around people who understood how to provide safe spaces and provide support in those spaces. And then I met Dr. Josie, who's been amazing, has been a mentor, has provided information on the side, help with your writing, just those types of things. And then, of course, in doing that, learning so much more about the different communities, different agencies, different organizations, and the different approaches and pathways to healing. So to be honest, for me, it's been the Men's Story Project that's been the most effective in providing me, I guess, a safe space to actually think about going outside and getting help and meeting people like Judson and being willing to share, on platforms like this. So, and that provides support for me. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Judson. So it seems like we're running out of time. I would like to remind you that you can check out the Men's Story Project in Facebook or at www.mensstoryproject.org. And remember that we in Denton County Friends of the Family have a crisis line that you can call or text 24/7. And the number is in the comments, but it's also 940-382-7273. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Judson. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Josie, for being here today and for extending this knowledge of survivors' stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Elia. Really quickly, just want to also give a shout out to a couple more great resources.
Yes.
One of them is Men Healing, which is the national organization specifically focused on supporting male survivors of sexual violence. So menhealing.org. Want to shout out the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. And then also other resources online are an organization also for male survivors of sexual violence called 1 in 6. So it's the numbers 1in6.org. And last, RAINN, which is another great website with resources. So that's RAINN.org. And feel free to also get in touch with me at the Men's Story Project if you want to create similar projects in your community.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.